gospel has the power to deliver. Many persons are in their bondages, not just because they desire it. There are spirits that have kept them in bondage. So the gospel also has the power to deliver. When we are preaching, the people who hear us first are not men. The beings that hear us first are not men. They are demons. You'll be shocked. Somebody may hear your message. It will take him 1 month to understand. But when a demon hears the truth, immediately the truth becomes judgment to it. Demons respond to our messages much more than men, because our messages comes to remind them of the judgment that is upon their lives. So when we go out to preach the gospel, we must be conscious that we have been commissioned to communicate the deliverance power. Jesus said in Luke chapter 4 verse 18, he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He said, for he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. See the gospel he was preaching. He said he has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty them that are bruised. Every time gospel is preached, deliverance takes place. In Acts 14 verse 8 to 10, the Bible said Paul was preaching, and he looked at a man who was impotent from birth and perceived that the man had faith to be healed. The moment Paul saw that this gospel had entered him, he said, he screamed with a loud voice, rise up, stand on thy feet. And immediately the man stood up. Because when gospel is preached, deliverance is taking place. Some people hear you. Why they are yet hearing you? They didn't even know something was happening. They now stand up and discover a pain has left them. They stand up and discover a movement in their body have ceased. They stand up and discover that an affliction has ended. They can't even tell when it happened. But as they were hearing, power was entering them. Power was entering them. That power, his job is to identify everything the devil is doing and destroy it. Many people hear you. You are preaching about repentance. They go home, they discover a favor comes upon them, and they get a job. And they are wondering, which connection do they have? They don't need to have any connection. That's what the gospel comes to do. Paul said, as sorrowful, yet rejoicing, as poor, making many rich. Because when the gospel is preached, in it also is the power to change the circumstances of men. That's why 2 Corinthians 8:9 says, Christ, rich as he was, he became poor that you might be made rich. There is something the gospel does to a man who is backward. To some, he gives them wisdom. That wisdom translates to invention that brings money. To some, he gives favor. That favor translates to a force that attracts wealth. To some, it gives alignment in season, so that lines fall for them in pleasant places and they step into the opportunity. But one way or the other, if a man is true to the gospel, his circumstance cannot be the same. For he lifted up the beggar from the dunghill and maketh him to stand with princes and inherit thrones. This is what the gospel comes to do. And above all, the gospel also gives you the power to stand before God. We no longer stand in fear in God's presence anymore. We stand in boldness, because now we know that because of the gospel, access has been granted us. In Luke 4:16, it said, come boldly before the throne of grace, obtain mercy and grace for help in the time of need. So we don't fidget in God's presence anymore. Not because the presence of God has lost its hallowedness, but because the gospel has empowered us to know that God is our Father, to know that the presence is the business of family. So we now have the right to participate and to partake in the presence. So in the gospel is power for conviction. In the gospel is power for transformation. In the gospel is power for deliverance. In the gospel is power for circumstantial turnaround. And in the gospel is the power to stand in God's presence. Very quickly, let me touch on the deliverance aspect of power, because that's the area I want to address tonight.